Hey everyone, thank you for coming out, and thank you to Product School for putting all these events together. So today I'll be going over how to make a blockchain product, and that starts with all the basics, the vocabulary, and the terminology involved. And then we'll get into some of the more specific problems that we have in this sector. So before we get started, does anyone want to share kind of their skill level or ability in blockchain? Like, have you guys done CryptoKitties or like trading, Silk Road? Yeah, okay, a little bit. So, the question I get asked most is, what is blockchain? And the definition that you're probably used to is it's an immutable and distributed data store, and in Ethereum's case, also a computation provider. And let me break that down. So that just means it's a fancy database, where you can store and retrieve data, and that it is distributed over thousands or millions of computers. It's not just on one company's server. But the way I like to explain it is that blockchain technology, it creates trust and enforces trust with software between parties who don't trust each other. Because the ledger is public and distributed, that means that anytime there's a transaction or some function over there, you know exactly what's going to happen, and that it can't be undone. So, why has blockchain taken off now? It's been all over, CNBC and all the news outlets in the last couple of years. So why is it so big right now? Bitcoin paved the way, and over the last decade, it showed that this kind of distributed ledger can be possible at scale. Before, no one's really tried it, outside of a few nodes. But again, Bitcoin showed that it could be done, and it does work. And we're discovering there are several features native to blockchain that wouldn't be realistic or feasible using traditional technologies. So decentralized, that means that not one entity or company controls it, and that's a really attractive feature here. And it's always on. So again, if some company has to maintain a database or server, it's really expensive, and it's pretty tough to be always available. With blockchain, because it's distributed, it's always available. And it's also self-sustaining. Again, if a company was hosting it, they would have to pay a ton of money for electricity and security and everything around it. But because all of the incentivization structures with mining, there's incentive for all the miners to keep it up. So there's no single point of failure there. As I mentioned before, it's immutable, so it can't be changed. And it's also threat resistant. Because of the way mining works, it's not really feasible or affordable to try and manipulate or change the records. And a little bit about myself, and I'll tell you about the companies and organizations I'm involved with. So if you want to ask me questions about those specifically, I'll be more than happy to answer that. But in essence, I do blockchain consulting, and it takes one of two forms. Either I go in and help a company figure out how they can use blockchain technology to either improve a business process or how they can improve a product offering with it. And then the other part of that is I'll go in, tell them how to build out a product, and then lead their tech teams to doing so. I'm involved with Slice. They're a real estate company on blockchain. So we do we tokenize real estate investments instead of having a security. With Fr8, we do supply chain on blockchain. And we're building a new protocol for last mile solutions. With Block Science, it's an economics and mathematics research firm specializing in token economics. And then with Decentral, it's the blockchain consultancy I'm involved with. So here, this is the really dense part of the demonstration, and we're going to start with the terms and definitions so you know how to speak the language. The terms you're probably familiar with are the public and private keys. So a public key, oftentimes it's also called an address. So for example, if you requested that I send some ETH to you, you would give me your address. And again, it's public, so you can share that. The private key, I'll emphasize that you have to be extremely safe with it, and it's used to sign a transaction, and I'll explain that process a little bit later on. One of the foundations of blockchain is all the transactions, and the way to think about it is it's a message. It typically consists from a to and from address, some value, so if you're sending some ETH or Bitcoin, it'll have a value, And you can also attach some data with it. So it's some kind of signal, or it can even be used to call functions on a smart contract. Transaction fees, and they're also known as gas. So every time you transact on the Ethereum blockchain, there are some fees involved. And this is where Ethereum really gets its value. So it's not just a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is. You need Ethereum to run processes and run functions on the blockchain. So that's the utility of it, and why it's taken off so much recently. Signing a transaction. So this is the process earlier that requires the private key. And what this does is it creates a signature for every transaction, and it proves the authenticity of a message. So if someone creates or broadcasts a transaction to send 5 Bitcoin from one account to another, we sign the transaction to make sure that the right account, that the owner of the right account created that transaction. And another term that you've probably heard before, wallet. So a wallet is an application. It could be a web app, could be a desktop app, or it could even be a hardware key. And it stores all of your keys. And it can also be used for signing transactions. So far, do you guys have any questions on these?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a fairly subjective question.
Sure.
So Ethereum seems to be, the way you posited it, it seems to be a traffic-based valuation. And there's so many factors that can affect the value of Ethereum. And
Are you talking about the trading value?
Yes.
Okay.
And do you think that, vaguely, do you think that traffic is, in the way that you put it, is a minor part of the value of Ethereum or a major part of it?
So for several reasons, I'd prefer not to comment on value or speculation of cryptocurrencies.
Sure.
Yeah, so this one, the focus will be a lot of the underlying tech. But as far as the terms and definitions go, everyone good so far? All right. So just 2 more pages, promise. All right, smart contract. This is a term that's for computational blockchains. So it doesn't really exist in Bitcoin, but it is popular in Ethereum and Dfinity and EOS. And you can think of it as an application with some functions. So someone could write the smart contract, deploy it, and it actually has an address on Ethereum, just like a user account would. So it can also hold tokens, and it can hold ETH. So a lot of the functionality, it could be like a really simple escrow function, and you can get really creative with it. Have it pay interest. The sky's the limit there.
For people who don't understand what is programming function, how do you explain?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
For people who don't understand what is function.
Okay. All right. So the question was, what is a function, especially in the context of blockchain? So you can think of a function. It has certain inputs, and the function can take a certain action and take an output. So if we were to give a more specific example, let's say that, what's your name?
Justin.
Okay, let's say Justin and I were setting up an escrow contract. And the terms of the contract are Justin has to send 100 ETH to this contract. And when he calls a certain function, so, I gave him a book or sold him a TV, then the ETH would be transferred over to my account. So the function would be called pay escrow, and as soon as he calls that from his account, it would trigger that action, and the ETH would be sent over. But a function could be as simple as adding up 2 numbers and then spitting back the result. Yeah. So does that clear it up?
I studied programming, but I want to understand more.
Okay. Yeah. So it's very simple.
Explain it like their water. When you're turning their water function, their tuning part is the function.
Yeah.
The way they're driving force, in the water case, it's not hand, right? Turning.
Oh yeah. So the driving force is. So the question was, what triggers a function, or how do you call a function? So that's done by broadcasting a transaction. So you do that from a wallet app or some front-end GUI. And I'll touch on those 2 points later on. Then we have blockchain explorers. So when you start working with blockchain, this is going to be your best friend. So Etherscan, it's a website where you can view all of the Ethereum transactions in blocks. I'll just give you a quick demo of what it is. So this is what it looks like. And this is the real Ethereum blockchain. You can go in just click on a transaction. You can view the history of an entire account. So here, if you're waiting for something to confirm or checking the status or how much ETH was transferred, you use. I typically use Etherscan, so that's how you can track everything going on there. And last page of definitions. We have mainnet and testnets, and it's exactly what they sound like. So the mainnet in Ethereum, that's using the real blockchain and real ETH. So you don't want to test on that because it can get really expensive. There's stories of people messing up and just instantly losing thousands of dollars. So you don't want to do that. And then we have testnets. They use fake ETH, they have various testnets with different proof algorithms. And so feel free to test. You can get free ETH as you want. And one thing to note: each of these nets, they're totally isolated. They're their own blockchain, so they don't talk to each other. So something that you do on one net has no effect on the others. Distributed application. So this is the new wave of all the blockchain applications that are coming out. So it could be a web, mobile, or desktop application that interacts with the blockchain in some way or another. And again, I think CryptoKitties is one of the first that has gone mainstream. And then a term you'll hear quite often, you don't have to know too much about it, but you should be familiar with Web3. And Web3 is a JavaScript framework that lets developers create applications that interact with the Ethereum blockchain. So here, we're going to discuss Web3 enabled browsers, and that's just a web browser like Chrome, but it has the Web3 functionality built in, so it can actually talk and interact with Ethereum. And on a higher level, this is how all the pieces fit together. So you have your server, maybe with a traditional database hosted on AWS, and then you'd have a client, which is the front end or a web app. So these two pieces, this is what you have on a traditional web application. And then we would use a Web3 provider, typically MetaMask, and I'll go into more detail there. And that's sort of a bridge between your traditional web browser and the blockchain. So through it, you can broadcast transactions and read data from the blockchain. And then, so now we'll do a quick CryptoKitties demo to kind of show each aspect of this. So, oh yes. Yeah, 1 sec. Is that any better? Okay, so here we'll just do the simple transaction of buying a cat. All right, let me check the internet here. Okay, here we go. So here, now let's pick this guy. So here, this is the traditional front end that you would get, but it is pulling in a lot of data from a server. So usually, you can't store really big files like pictures or really big documents on Ethereum blockchain. It would be extremely expensive. So you'd use a traditional database for that. And then here, so sign in to buy. It's talking to my MetaMask, but it is currently locked. So let me unlock it. And then I'll get into more detail of what MetaMask is a little bit later. So now using Web3, it knows that I've unlocked my MetaMask, and we can go ahead and buy one. So as soon as I hit this, it'll trigger, so this is MetaMask. It'll trigger and create this transaction with MetaMask. And here you can see, oh, wow. All right. Yeah, let's just, is that any better? I don't know if it gets bigger. Yeah. What? Oh, there we go. All right. So here we have, this is the From account. So this is my Ethereum account. This is one of the CryptoKitties marketplace accounts. I'm sending it 0.003 ETH. That's how much the cat costs. And then, so these are the gas fees that we talked about earlier, and I'll touch on each of these points in more detail later on. And then, as you see, once again, for this transaction to take place, the transaction the transaction fees go to the miners, and again, that's the incentivization that upholds the blockchain. So now I'll go ahead and submit this transaction. And when I do it, in the background, MetaMask is signing this transaction with the private key. So MetaMask is holding my private key. Then as soon as I did that, here it sees that that I've submitted the transaction. And now we can go ahead and track it on Etherscan. So now we're waiting for it to be mined. And this is pretty much as complex as most dApps are at the moment. So going back here, have you seen the current state of affairs in blockchain? We're in the very, very early days. Things are still being figured out. The user experience is quite poor in many cases. You have to go through a lot of steps, and it's not the most intuitive. And also just the computational capabilities of blockchain. Right now, it's still a bit slow. I think we're still waiting for the transaction to mine, and it'll be a few more minutes. But these are all stepping stones, and it'll be running quickly in no time. So yes.
When you're saying mine, what we're waiting for is the miners to prove that you have the Ethereum to make that transaction?
Right. So how that works, when I broadcast this transaction, it gets sent to a mempool, which is just a pool with a bunch of pending transactions, and miners pick those up. And usually they prioritize the ones with the higher transaction fee because the miners will earn more for processing those. But it is a bit of a random process. Yes.
Quarter miner. Can you make yourself become a miner if you do want to?
Oh yeah. So the question was, what is a miner, and can you make yourself become a miner? So yes, you can go ahead. Usually people buy a lot of GPUs. You plug in your computer, connect it to Ethereum, and you can go ahead and become a miner. So yeah, anyone can do that. So even this laptop could be a miner.
And the matching between who pick up their mining transaction is automated, right? You don't have to go to a marketplace. They have. Right.
Yeah. The question was, are the transactions picked up automatically? So yeah, the Ethereum has protocols that handle all this for you.
So if you want to make money, just buy more CPU, let you leave at night.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So blockchain has a few unique challenges as it relates to product. Just because there's so many additional layers and steps, as you just saw. And because of that, the blockchain product managers will typically require a deeper level of technical expertise, just because you have to have some understanding of what's going on under the hood, with transactions and mining and accounts in order to make a good product. You'll have to work closely with the designers to overcome and work with the caveats and limitations of blockchain. So the 5 main challenges of blockchain products are right here. We have user education, because again, it's such a new technology. Most people don't even have any crypto accounts, so you'll really have to hold their hand most of the way. We have the transaction fees. Key management is a challenge. Signing the transactions is a hectic process. And then, as you've just seen, mining time and verification, that's just a hurdle you have to deal with. So when it comes to user education, as with any product, kind of know what you can expect from your average user based on what you're building. But realistically, most people aren't going to have any knowledge of blockchain or private public keys or what a transaction is. So through the onboarding, you'll have to be really careful and just have a lot of messaging, through each step of the way, explaining hey, this is your private key. Don't give it to anyone. Don't lose it. This is what a transaction is, talk about the gas. So a lot of it is just, having all the messaging and literature there during the onboarding process. And many times, they won't even have an account. So in Slice, for example, the real estate investing platform, we essentially have the option to create accounts for them, just to help the onboarding be really smooth and help them get started. For a lot of other apps I've seen, they have really detailed guides on downloading MetaMask and how to get MetaMask set up. So, it's just something to be aware of. And a big part of the education is key management, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Yes.
You said that basically for your Slice, for your customers, you basically create an account for them.
Yes.
So who's responsible for the key in case you lose it?
Okay, so we create the account on the front end. So we never know what anyone's private key is, and we never touch or manage it. The user is responsible for managing it. But I'll go over a few approaches to kind of make it easier on the user at a later section. So the other challenge with transaction fees, because there are transaction fees, that means to do anything on the Ethereum blockchain, you already need to have ETH. And the real pain point there is it sucks to obtain ETH right now. It can take over a week. You have to make a Coinbase account. You have to do a bank transfer. You have to buy it, and then you have to export it from your Coinbase account to your MetaMask, or whatever wallet you use. So good luck getting a user to stay on after that. There are a few solutions. One is just giving someone ETH or airdropping it. You just have to be really careful because it can get expensive, and people, like hackers, are very smart. They'll figure out a way to abuse that. And then there's a limited workaround that I've done with a few companies. So with transaction fees, if you write to the blockchain, you have to pay. But if you're just reading data from it, it's free. So you can do things that, if you launch a token and there's a restricted part of your app or website, you can say like, oh, you need to have at least 50 of these tokens to access this. So you can read for free, and that's kind of like a limited workaround there. All right, so key management. Again, I cannot stress that when you guys go out and make your MetaMask accounts, don't lose the seed words and don't lose the private keys and don't give them to anyone. It's not like passwords, because once they're gone, they're completely gone. And if someone steals it and creates a transaction on your behalf, there's no way to undo it. And I'm sure you've heard of quite a few hacks of people losing tens of millions of Bitcoins or ETH, due to poor key management. So here, this comes back to the user education part of it, and you really have to hold their hand here. There's a few solutions. If you're not dealing with super high value assets, you can just store the keys on your own server, and you can sign transactions on the user's behalf. So in a sense, the user won't even know that there's anything going on in the blockchain. You're just using the ledger benefits of that technology. There's also hardware solutions. So the picture here, it's a pretty common hardware key that you can use. And now there's a Chrome extension that interacts with that, very similar to MetaMask. You have some software wallets that live on the desktop. And then, typically the most common solution will be a Web3 enabled browser like Mist, or MetaMask used with Google Chrome. For signing transactions, again, every transaction has to be signed by the user's private key to prove authenticity, or the blockchain will reject it. So here, common solutions, this ties in very closely to the wallet. You can store the key on the server, on your servers, and sign the transaction on the user's behalf, but it is a huge security risk, so be careful with that. You can also build wallet functionality right into the app, or make your own Chrome extension. And that way, at least the private key will be stored locally on the user's own computer, and the servers will never see it. And again, you can, the typical solution, you've heard me say it a lot, is just rely on MetaMask for it. So with Fr8, we had a very similar issue. We need our users to be able to read data from the blockchain. We need them to be able to broadcast transactions. So for example, here we track the state of a shipment, from the time it's created all the way to when it's delivered at someone's door. And throughout this whole process, we store the state of the shipment on the blockchain. So we need to sign transactions to update that. And here we made our own little Chrome extension that our carriers and shippers can use to monitor this. And here, again, the messaging and user education is crucial. So you kind of want to hold your user's hand through each step of the way, because this is something so new. Like imagine when someone used the internet for the first time. It's a totally new world, a little confusing. All right, so with mining time, again, once a transaction is broadcast, it has to be mined. And on the main net, it can take anywhere from 30 seconds to several minutes. It can even be half an hour or longer if the network is really, really congested. They're looking at ways to improve this, but it's not there yet. And one thing to note, if you broadcast your transaction with higher transaction fees, it's more likely to get mined faster. because that's just how transactions are prioritized with the miners. Figuring out what the transaction or gas fees should be, just do that for the users or have suggestions. Like, even I have no idea what to set them to half the time. So, make sure you take care of that, and there's functions that you can do to calculate that. Depending on the level of security, you may need to wait for block confirmations. And what that is once your transaction is mined, it goes into a block, and confirmations are how many blocks have been built since your transaction. So for example, for a really, really high security application like Coinbase or GDAX, whenever you transfer crypto like Bitcoin or Ethereum in, you have to wait. So for Ethereum, they wait for 30 transactions. In most cases, like they wait for 30 blocks to be built on top. But that's for millions of dollars. For most applications, like 1 or 2 is fine. And then, so the one thing I keep bringing up is MetaMask. And what it is, it's a Chrome extension, and it turns Google Chrome into a Web3 enabled browser. So you can think of it as a bridge between the website and web interface you see and the blockchain. And it's really paved the way for distributed applications. Before it was so complicated to sign a transaction. You have to go between 3 different applications on your desktop. There's a lot of copying and pasting. So it's not really practical. And with MetaMask, even though it's still a cumbersome process, it's way more streamlined, and it's really helped the adoption of blockchain. And I'll just give you a quick walkthrough of how it looks like and what it does. So, all right, can you guys see this? Yeah. Let me try launching a new one. All right, it's stuck in big mode. But here you can see the account, you can see your ETH balance, and it shows you a list of transactions that you made. And if you hold any tokens, you can set it up so it shows your tokens as well. You can have multiple accounts here, and it's really easy to create new ones. You just press a button. And when I mentioned there's a mainnet and a testnet, it's really easy to switch. If you're testing out an application, it's all built right into the app. So any questions on MetaMask? It's a critical tool for any blockchain applications right now. Don't know the name of the company. It's their own thing. Yeah. Do people try? Yeah, all their code and repositories are public, and they've been audited many times. Yes.
Do you know of equivalents for non-closed source web browsers? I
do not. I know there's a mist.
Owned by Google. It's
yeah.
Decentralized. It's owned by.
Yeah, there are several distributed browsers coming.
Even just Firefox. Do you know of an equivalent for open source?
I don't. There may be one. There's also the Mist browser, which is its own browser. I don't know if it's open source or closed source, but that's another solution. Yes.
Where does MetaMask store the private key? Because I read some articles that it can be hacked.
Okay, so it can be hacked if your computer's unlocked and you've unlocked MetaMask, but it stores it locally. I'm not going to show you how to do it, but if your computer's unlocked, that is the one vulnerability with it. Hopefully they're fixing it in the next version. But yes. I mean, I trust enough, just, don't.
Physically, someone would have to do it.
Like, someone would literally have to be up here, and I will also have to unlock my MetaMask wallet for them to see it. So that very first thing when we opened up CryptoKitties, and I put in the password, I would have to do that. And so right now, if someone took it, they can get the private key. Yeah.
Even stored locally, not on a server, but you download some weird software, be able to see your root file and upload the root files for other third-party software. Right? Or the chance they can.
Well, it's locked until you unlock it with the password. So like if you got.
Have your root file within your laptop.
No, it's encrypted. It's hashed with the password. Yeah. All right. Something else. Okay. So then, the main takeaways from this talk, you should be, familiar with a lot of the blockchain vocabulary, terminology, and concepts, and have a better view of how all the pieces fit together. And then you should also know, what are the common problems when you're building a blockchain blockchain product, and how do you deal with those? And before we part, I have a little bit of advice. So this space is constantly growing, and there's so much innovation involved. So don't be afraid to try new approaches. What I've shown here, it's just a few ideas, but a month or 2 months from now, there's going to be brand new tools and to deal and address these issues. And also, if you are interested in getting involved with the blockchain company, find a few companies that you're really interested in, go through their white papers, and just reach out to them. I know so many companies, they're always looking for talented people to come on board, and they're always looking for help and trying to grow as quickly as possible. It's a really open community, so feel free to reach out, and you have a pretty good chance of hearing back from them. Yes?
What do you find to be some of the most valuable transferable skills to the blockchain community? Because in so many industries, machine learning, let's say, database management, there's lots of people out there with skills. This is such a new industry. And so for someone who's coming, let's say, from machine learning or database management, what are the kind of things that maybe you or your friends look for?
Right. So the question was, what are the transferable skills from traditional tech companies or tech programming languages into blockchain? So a lot of it is just really creative problem solving, because again, no one's an expert on Solidity. Everyone that knows Solidity, for the most part, they've only been doing it for a year or two. So everyone's kind of green in that sense. If you work really hard to learn it, you have to be really aware. If you want to go into programming, be really aware of the the low level bit level concepts. But it's all about just really critical problem solving and being okay with a lot of trial and error. Yeah. Yes.
So based on the companies you mentioned, you worked for or co-founder, what was like the sequence? Did you start a consulting company first and then work with those other companies, or vice versa?
So prior to blockchain, I was doing a lot of consulting for non-blockchain consulting for startups. They're building out algorithms or building out their products, and then I slowly positioned myself in blockchain. Yes, go ahead.
These companies that on blockchain, real estate and logistics.
Yes.
Did they exist before they launched the blockchain?
No, they're very new. The real estate one launched earlier this year, I believe in February, and the shipping and logistics company, I think it was either December or January.
Are they live already? Do they have customers to do this?
No, so we're in the build phase for Fr8, the shipment company. We have a prototype, and we're piloting it with a few customers right now. For Slice, the real estate company, we're doing the build out. Yes.
What is the token economy for the Fr8?
I can't comment on that. Sorry, there's so many security rules, I really can't say anything. Yes, in the back.
In terms of the different blockchain technologies out there, obviously you're talking today about Ethereum.
Yes.
Just doing some basic Googling, there's things like Hyperledger and whatever else. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of the Ethereum-based way of doing blockchain versus some of the others?
So with Ethereum, it was really the first computational blockchain to gain mass adoption. It has its challenges. It can be quite slow, and with the price of ETH right now, transactions can be really expensive. Like not the cat, but just the transaction cost me like $1.50 right now. So you have to be aware of that. There are new blockchains coming up like EOS and Dfinity that are supposed to be much, much faster. They can handle, I think, like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands transactions per second. So there are faster technologies in the works. Ethereum will also switch over to proof of stake, hopefully this year or early next, and that should speed things up quite a lot. For Hyperledger, they're kind of like a closed company, and it's part of IBM.
Oh.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
For those of us who aren't super interested in financial stuff, all the cryptocurrencies and all that, where do you see blockchain evolving to involve other technologies, or is it all going to be like, yay, Bitcoin?
Okay, so the question was, is all this is blockchain just about the cryptocurrency hype, or is there a legitimate use for it? So all these tokens, I see it as sort of a side effect of blockchain technology. The technology is here to stay, and it's going to change so many industries. There are a few other technologies where you get an immutable ledger that's always online and more or less unhackable. So the technology is here to stay. It's not. It's just still being built out because it's so early on. There's still a lot of fine tuning and discovery involved. So again, all the tokens are just one side effect of this technology. That's not what this technology is about. Yes.
So I'm getting into protocol design right now, and I'm trying to figure out how are you designing like protocols when you said the one for Fr8 network?
Right.
Is it more at like smart contract actually level? Or
it's at the smart. Yeah. Currently, Fr8 is on Ethereum, so it is at the smart contract level. It's not a new blockchain protocol. It's a protocol for shipping.
Sure. And you guys do like more also like off-chain computation?
We try to. It's going to be mostly on-chain.
Everything is on-chain.
Yeah. There's metadata stored off-chain, but the actual functional pieces are on-chain.
Sure. And why did you decide to actually build make a Chrome extension for your participants?
So for us, we needed a really easy way for users to sign transactions, but with MetaMask, when you sign a transaction in the interface, it's not really clear what you're doing. There's just a submit button and hope something happens. With our own Chrome extension, it made it possible to give the users feedback at each stage of the way. Because again, education, like I can't stress user education enough. That's what's really going to make it or break it for blockchain.
One more question.
Yeah.
Any resources for like protocol design?
Not at the moment. We can speak afterwards. Yeah. Oh, and real quick before I forget, if you guys do want to get in touch after this, you can. These are my Twitter and Telegram handles. So with the Twitter one, there is an underscore at the front. Someone else took the name I wanted. Yeah, I know. Any other questions? Yes, Dylan.
So thinking between like a traditional approach and or building a product on blockchain, like what would be some unique benefits? I understand some of the implicit benefits of a blockchain, but why would I want to just use it as my backend infrastructure?
Got it. So the question was, why would you want to use blockchain instead of for your backend or database instead of a traditional, like SQL database? So the way I see it, blockchain is a tool, and it's going to be used in combination with a traditional database, and with traditional servers. So there are certain functionalities of an app that do require extreme trust. In Fr8, for example, you want to know the exact shipment state of a shipment, and you also want to know that it has not been tampered with. If that data is on your SQL base and that you control and can do anything with, you don't have the advantages of blockchain technology. But we do store a lot of user and metadata in a traditional blockchain, in a traditional database, because it's not practical to do that on blockchain. So I really think the benefit of
when would be practical to use it?
To store a large, I can't say. There are a few blockchain technologies that are trying to solve this problem, but they haven't been launched yet. Yes.
So if the price of Ethereum keeps growing, right? So then transaction fees keeps growing.
Yes.
So one will be. So assuming that, let's worst case scenario is gonna grow forever, right? And
well, it's
at some point.
So without going into too much detail, it's a combination of how many miners are available and how many transactions are happening. If the price of Ethereum goes very high, there are going to be more miners because there's more money to be made. So it'll kind of balance out.
But in terms of transaction fees, which basically relates.
Right, they're low. If there are more miners available, then and there aren't enough transactions, then they have to accept lower transaction fees, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And the fees that they charge, is it like percentage of the?
No. When you create a transaction, you say what you want to pay.
But it's amount of Ethereum, not the percentage.
Yeah, and a lot of times, these transactions, you're not actually sending any ETH. You could be calling a smart contract function. And so actually, the more complicated that function is, like the more computations involved or the longer it takes to run on a processor, the more ETH it costs. Yeah. Yes.
When you say that there are more miners and it drives the transaction fees down, you also said earlier in your presentation that transaction fees pay for faster transactions. So are you saying that it's a combination of, are you saying it's more of a supply and demand problem, or is it more of a, there's more guys out there, so somebody's going to be faster than the other guy?
Yeah, so the question was, when you have a lot more miners, but the transaction fees go down, but also higher transaction fees are prioritized. So it is just like supply and demand. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yes, yeah, in the back.
How your customers are taking this in? Like, when you say you build on top of blockchain, are they more excited or are they scared?
Right now there's been a lot of excitement about the technology, so it's been well received. But I always like to don't have a tool looking for a problem to solve. Have a problem to solve and then use the right tool for it. And in these companies, it happens to be that blockchain is the right tool.
And following up on that, are they reaching out to you because they have a specific problem solver and they are kind of aware that blockchain can solve this, or you are kind of educating them that blockchain?
So I've had both situations where certain companies are exploring using the technology. So we go over their product line and also their internal processes. So if they have some kind of internal accounting process, and we'll see, is it beneficial to put that on blockchain? Is it going to save them a bunch of money or give them better data? And then we evaluate it. But for other companies, they actually say like, hey, this is what we want to build. This is how we want it to. They have a rough idea of how they want it to work on the blockchain, and I'll sit down and figure out the architecture and build it out with them. Yes.
How do you deal with Web3, calling Web3 from like native mobile applications?
React Native.
And you're talking to Web3 from React Native?
Yeah, I can show you a demo. I actually did it for Fr8 very recently. Yeah, I can show you a demo afterwards. Yes.
What's the benefits to clients to using the blockchain rather than a centralized server? If let's say they want to keep track of like logistics or movements within like their own internal factory, is it for like external auditors, or is it because they're somehow going to be using like outside of their factories?
All right. So the question was, I think it was in shipping and logistics. Yeah. So the question was, in shipping and logistics, what are the advantages to keeping track of it on blockchain versus at a centralized server? So a lot of it is auditing, but the bigger picture is when you're shipping something, there are so many different companies involved, and so many different modes of transportation and all the distributors. So it's because there's so many different parties involved, you need that single source of truth from the blockchain.
Do you guys use like RFID? And then my second question after is, are you guys using the Ethereum blockchain to help clients, or are you using like your own chain?
We are using Ethereum. We're not building our own blockchain for now. And the other question was, do we use RFID to track items? We are exploring that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, go ahead.
Based on your experience working with Ethereum, can you tell us your opinion about like side chains for scalability, like Lightning Network versus a whole new blockchain that has better scalability, or TPS?
Okay, so the question was, what are my thoughts on side networks like Raiden, and I think you said Lightning. So the issue that's related to the mining time, and you saw how long it takes, and how high the transaction fees are. So right now there's some solutions to do transactions off-chain. It comes down to trust. If something's done on a side chain or off-chain, for an auditing process, that's probably a no-go. But for a general use case, I think it's fine. Yes.
I think for the entire logistics challenge, I don't see it as a challenge of how you share the data, how do you make people trust it. It's a first mile problem. It's how the data being recorded. I think that is a big challenge when people talk about different parts. Like, how do you record?
Right. That's
that is immutable, that people cannot destroy, because you may either need your QR code scanning or barcode scanning or Bluetooth connection or some sort. Those can be hacked easily or monetized before they even arrive at the blockchain.
All right. So it's a specific, shipping question. We can talk about it later. But if anyone has more, generic blockchain questions,
Is it possible to stay anonymous during those transactions?
So the question was, is it possible to stay anonymous? And you can stay pseudo-anonymous. So what that means is, you have an Ethereum account, you have your public key, your address that you're transacting from. You have to keep a barrier between that public key and you and your identity. So if someone can track those transactions or that account to you, then you lose then you're no longer anonymous. But if you can maintain that, then no one knows who that account belongs to.
Is it so difficult? Is it difficult to maintain that?
I mean, it depends what you're doing, Yeah. If you do a KYC process, then it's pretty trackable. Yes.
Thanks for answering all the questions. I have another one. When
Yeah.
it comes down to like cost for the company, when you want to convince someone to use the blockchain, does the conversation go into like cost? How much it costs the company to have it centralized or decentralized because of the fees?
No, so that the question was, when I'm working with these companies, is the cost of having a centralized server and database, is that a factor in the decision of whether to go blockchain or not? So it's typically not, because for most of these projects, you're still going to have some aspect of it centralized. So it's not like you can do away with that completely. You're still going to have need a database with some of the bigger files and bigger data. Yes.
And how do you manage in this case to have something centralized and something decentralized, to do the kind of communication between them? Do you, like, in the centralized system, create a node that they all themselves and then connect to it, or just like Infra or this kind of stuff like that?
All right. So the question was, how do you how do you reconcile having a centralized server and database and the block and having it talk to the blockchain, which is decentralized? So we'd usually store the user's public key. Let's say we have a user table in our private database. We would store a public key and associate the user with that address. And you were asking about Infura?
Yeah, because like if let's say you run your own node and then you have your database, your private database that just fetch on this node. What tells you that your node is not corrupted, for example? Why you wouldn't just get to any other node? So if you have a central node, it means like this node is corrupted. So
okay.
the to have something centralized and something decentralized at the same time. It's like if one gets corrupted, you don't even notice it.
All right. Yeah. So the question was, I guess, related to mining, and you can connect to certain nodes to broadcast transactions and read data from the blockchain. So that's actually a pretty complicated topic. We can talk about it later if you'd like. Yes. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming.